All right, now listen up. As you know, we've had a problem with animals in this house from time to time. And I think I figured it out. These terrible growling noises and horrible things that we've been experiencing. It's my dog, Francois Pierre. He's pretending to be a wild animal just to throw me off my game. Now, he and I have had our differences. In the first place, he's a MAGA Republican, and I'm a moderate Democrat. And but now he's taken these political differences to a whole new level, trying to spook me out, thinking that he's some ferocious animal, which, as far as his politics are concerned, he is a ferocious animal. But he's not really a ferocious animal. He just liked to pretend that he was. And sometimes I think he actually thinks that he is, especially with the dreaded, and I can't say the word out loud, but the L word, Lazza, you know what I'm saying, right? Oh, they're concerned. He is so aggressive, and he's not afraid of any of them. But I haven't seen him going after any lions or tigers or even other big dogs. But boy, those little bitty Lazzs are concerned. He's on his game. Unfortunately for him, his game isn't that great, and he's never caught any. He did catch one time, and I grabbed him and pried his mouth open and took the lizard out. He didn't resist much because I think he was like, what do I do now? Fortunately, I solved that problem for him. Enough of that. So, I'm going to talk to you about bank failures. And we just had sort of a near scare the other day when Silicon Valley Bank went under. Basically, it was bought out by other companies because they couldn't. They didn't have enough deposits to cover enough money to cover the deposits, and many of those deposits above the 250,000 were for payrolls. So the government stepped in and they ensured that everybody would get their payrolls. In the meantime, they fired the guy. I don't know how the government was able to do it, but they fired the management. And then private banks came in and they just bought that one up, and there was another bank and maybe two other banks in similar precarious conditions. And so, there was the stock market, of course, being totally wimpish in all respects. So, oh my goodness, the banks are all failing, and so the market took a dip. Then when they stabilized that situation, the market came back up again, as it almost always does. Not every stock does, but the market overall always comes back. Because where else are people going to put their money? You can put them in T-bills, which was really the net cause of why that bank failed. They bought a bunch of T-bills that were paying really low interest rates. They should have known interest rates would be going up, and as interest rates go up, it doesn't just cost people money. Other people actually make money. If you buy T-bills that were paying 1%, you're making that T-bills a lot less valuable than a subsequently issued T-bill, those are treasury bills, that can be paying 4%. So if you're sitting there with a vault full of 1% T-bills, you're going to have a hard time selling those T-bills because you're competing with the government that's now selling the same face value at 4% income. So, and when you're dealing with billions of dollars, a few $100 million here, a few $100 million there, it adds up after a while. Not that most of you would notice because you're all so rich you don't care. But for the non-subscriber here, the average person, that's a lot of money. So it got me thinking about this, about the whole bank situation. And it was my feeling that this is largely a Republican phenomenon. And why would you go with your feelings, you ask? Well, I'm not going with my feelings, so get off my back. I looked it up, and sure enough, every major bank failure in this country, and I don't mean individual banks, I mean the system, every time that happened, there was a Republican president. Every time, and this is going back to when the Republican Party first came into existence and elected Abraham Lincoln as the first Republican president. The first time there was a major bank failure, I'm just going to call it bank failure, not meaning a single bank, but the banking system, occurred in, I believe it was, I was young at the time, so I don't remember exactly, but I think it was 1873. And whatever date it was, Grant was president. The next time there was a major bank failure, Teddy Roosevelt was president, another Republican, although albeit a very liberal Republican president, and frankly my favorite Republican president after Lincoln. But it happened on a Republican's watch, Republican president. The next time was during the George Bush Sr. administration, and that bank failure, I was well aware of that one. And that occurred because of the failure of the Reagan administration when Ronald Reagan was president, one of his numerous failings, was to properly regulate banking loans. And we had an example right here locally where a bank had loaned millions of dollars to a ski resort. The only problem was that ski resort was being built on the side of the mountain that doesn't have the snow, which makes skiing very difficult and actually painful, not to mention the damage it does to your skis when you try skiing down a slope which is covered with rocks instead of snow. And it could also cause a number of people to suffer serious injuries and deaths. That never happened, fortunately, because that ski resort on the wrong side of the mountain was never built. Imagine that. That bank went under because of that stupid loan. And why is that the Reagan administration's fault? Because there are regulators in the federal government who were supposed to catch this sort of thing. But Reagan took the view, as do so many Republicans when it comes to the banking system, of hands off, let the banks be what they want to be, let the banks be banks, let Reagan be Reagan, and let the banks be banks. Well, when you do that, you're putting a lot of power in the hands of people who may not be that smart and who often are greedy and reckless. But the Republican sort of overarching mantra is government is bad, keep government away from things, let the private sector do whatever it wants to do, and the magic of the free enterprise system will cause the banks to do the right thing, except, of course, until they don't. And that was the same philosophy that governed when Grant was president, it governed when Roosevelt was president. I'm sorry, I left out the biggest one. So Grant, you had Teddy Roosevelt, and then you had Herbert Hoover, the Great Depression, and that's when the banks really collapsed. How could I leave that out? So, and that's when the Roosevelt New Deal came in, and one of the first thing they did was close all the banks. So it's to stop the runs on the bank, people withdrawing all their money. They stopped that. Eventually, they put in the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is what safeguards almost all deposits. Also does safeguard all deposits less than 200. It's now 250,000. It was a lot less than that in those days. But they actually took the steps to regulate and control the banks so that the bank failures would not occur again and sink the economy. And it was working pretty well until Ronald Reagan came along and said, we're just not going to enforce these things. And that's what happened. We had that, and that, of course, took place, that the failures of the banks took place when George Bush Sr. was president, but it wasn't because of anything that was done in his administration. It was he was Roosevelt, it was the Reagan-Bush administration, but that wasn't run by Bush. It was run by Reagan. And the direction in which he pointed his bank regulators, which is hands off. And almost every time we've had a major economic setback in this country, it's been because of the banks. Not almost every time, particularly in 1929. Then the next problem we had a problem with the banks was in George Bush Jr.'s administration. And George Bush Jr.'s, with these credit default swaps that they knew were dangerous, but they just let them alone. They let the banks do what they want to do. If the banks want to engage in these risky insurance policies for real estate and the bundling and the breaking up real estate loans into little pieces and bundling them together and selling them with packages that had some good loans and bad loans, all of that was totally risky behavior. And sure enough, it all came crashing down and resulted in the Bush Jr. administration ending in a pretty much a shameful situation where the economy was going back into a dangerous territory once again. Obama came in and reversed all those policies, and the banks stabilized again and remained stable until just this last event, and that was when it was quickly and easily controlled and did not cause any sort of widespread economic failure of our economy. But I was watching this. I think it was Tucker Carlson. Yes, it was Tucker Carlson. And so Tucker, whose name rhymes with, what does his name rhyme with? Something Carlson, Tucker Carlson. I don't know. It rhymes with something. And if you can figure it out, please let me know. And if it's not obscene, which I suspect it might be, we'll run it on this program. So Tucker Carlson had Mr. Wonderful on his show. Now, in case you don't know who Mr. Wonderful is, no, I'm not Mr. Wonderful. I'm Mr. Magnifico. There's a difference. We're both Irish. Mr. Wonderful, I forget his real name, but it's an Irish name. And he's on that show where people come in and pitch their wares, and they try to convince this panel to fund them. And so Mr. Wonderful came on the Tucker show, and Tucker says, well, Mr. Wonderful, isn't it true? And he figured Mr. Wonderful was going to agree with him, that the last thing we need is the government coming in and these small banks failing and the big banks gobbling them up, and then we'll have a relatively small number of big banks basically owning the banking system in this country. And he didn't stop there. That wasn't his concern. He said, and then the government will come in and really start regulating these banks. Well, they're supposed to regulate them anyway. But apparently in his mind, it was a horror story where the federal government would then come in and basically be running and controlling these banks. And it's terrible because this is government control and government not letting free enterprise do whatever it wants to do, whether it's pollution or risky ventures or whatever. It's just the government should stay out of it. Because that's his philosophy, and that's generally the conservative philosophy, and it's the Republican philosophy. Forget what they talking about with the social issues and all that sort of thing. You get right down to it. It's always about the money, and it's always about not wanting the government to force big businesses, particularly the banking system, to toe some kind of a line. So he was pitching this to Mr. Wonderful, and Mr. Wonderful is a pretty bright guy. I guess he's a multi-billionaire now, just as an investor. And Mr. Wonderful said, well, yeah, it's a good idea that they get rid of these small banks. And then the government could have a better hand in regulating the banking system like they do in most major countries of the world, so the banks don't get out of control and cause another economic collapse. And T-Man Carlson says, oh, yes, I know, but you agree that that's just a bad thing to have all this government control. And T-Man said, well, no, I don't. I think it's a great idea. And then T-Man's got it all kind of flustered, and he was like, well, and then he changed the subject. So I got a kick out of watching T-Man try to put words in somebody's mouth, and the words just didn't stick. So that was an enjoyable moment for me, and I don't have that many enjoyable moments. So I have to go now because Francois Pierre is demanding that I feed him again. That dog does nothing but eat. I just fed him 2 days ago. I don't know what is his story, but I have to go take care of that, and I'm sure that all of you are disappointed that we have to terminate this program early. But if you don't like it, you can send your cards and letters to Francois Pierre, care of the Irish Magnifico show, and he will ignore them. Bye.